Nicholas will share for 10 minutes on guidelines on SDA Christian involvement in politics, and then we'll have each panelist will weigh in whether in agreement or if they disagree, any additions. You'll be able now to bring your scholarly weight to his presentation, and let's see if we can come to a consensus, some kind of conclusion to guide our audience. Nicholas.
And there's a pretty famous quote by Ellen White that talks about, it's in Desire of Ages 508 and 509, that the government under which Jesus lived was corrupt and oppressive. On every hand were crying abuses, extortion, intolerance, and grinding cruelty. Yet the Savior attempted no civil reforms. He attacked no national abuses, nor condemned the national enemies. He did not interfere with the authority or administration of those in power. He was our example. He who was our example kept aloof from earthly government, not because he was indifferent to the woes of men, but because the remedy did not lie in merely human and external measure. Now, usually I find myself on the other side of that quote, explaining why it doesn't stop us from involving ourselves in politics. But in this instance, I think it's a good example of how the Spirit inspiration tells us that while Christ may have been very political in his involvement in society, that he did keep apart from, he chose not to involve himself in government, which I earlier defined as the formal levers of power. And our early pioneers really had quite strong views on this, that the only way some of the early ones wanted to involve themselves with government was in perhaps civil disobedience, breaking government laws. And Ellen White was supportive of that. You remember the Fugitive Slave Act in the early 1850s and 60s. She said that, in fact, the law of our land requiring us to deliver a slave to his master, we are not to obey. And several of our pioneers, including our first General Conference president, helped run underground stops on the Underground Railroad. So the question was, yes, we can be engaged in civil disobedience, but can we engage in affirmative political involvement? Some early Adventists didn't think we should vote. But in 1865, the General Conference made a formal declaration on this, which has continued to this day. It hasn't been changed or removed. Resolved that in our judgment, the act of voting, when exercised in behalf of justice, humanity, and right, is itself blameless, and may it sometimes be highly proper, but that the casting of any vote that shall strengthen the cause of such crimes as intemperance, insurrection, and slavery, we regard as highly criminal in the sight of heaven, but we would deprecate any participation in the spirit of party strife. So the very early Adventists said, yes, if you can vote to support justice, humanity, and right, you should, but you shouldn't vote for intemperance and violence, and I would say racism would be equivalent of our day of their slavery. But we shouldn't participate in party strife. And so some people view this as, well, we can vote our conscience, but we should never say anything about who we vote for or about political issues. And indeed, there's a couple of things that Ellen White said that seem to support this. She the final quote that impressed itself on my life as a young man, from Messages to Young People, page 36, where she seems to go beyond being involved in issues to actually allowing some role, perhaps formal role, in government. Dear youth, what is the aim and purpose of your life? Are you ambitious for education, that you may have a name and position in the world? Have you thoughts that you dare not express, that you may one day stand upon the summit of intellectual greatness, that you may sit in deliberative and legislative councils and help to enact laws for the nation? There is nothing wrong in these aspirations. You may, every one of you, make your mark. You should be content with no mean attainment. Aim high and spare no pains to reach the standard.